Hello everyone, my name is Pascal Matthias and thank you for joining us today on what is the last day of Black History Month. I'm really excited to be here today to welcome our guest speaker all the way from North California, Tolúlope Ògúnremí, sorry. What we have today is a really exciting talk with Tolúlope, who has done so much amazing work and is an alumni of the University of Southampton. Today we aim to talk to 7 o'clock, but we will give time for questions. We aim to have a rich discussion, very safe discussion, so please do populate your questions. On the right hand side you will see a space to ask questions. We have today alumni, friends, students and supporters from EDI and from further afield. The overview of today will really encompass what I do in my role as the Associate Vice President for EDI and Social Justice at Southampton University. What we really want to talk today is how we align our aims and strategies at the university, but also really investigate and uncover Tolúlope's work and what she's done and what she continues to do. So before I welcome Tolúlope to our conversation, I just want to give a little bit of an outline of what Tolúlope has done. She graduated with a first in mathematics and computer science from Southampton in 2019. In her first year at Southampton, she established Coders of Colour alongside her programme of academic study. Coders of Colour is a social enterprise aiming to close the digital divide. It helps young people of colour between the ages of 11 and 25 access training in machine learning, app development, and ultimately pursue a career in tech. Her aim is ultimately to help those close the digital divide. Less than 5 years since graduating, her achievements have been incredible. In 2021, Tolúlope was named in the Forbes 30 under 30 listings in the social impact category. And her work for Coders in Colour, she was the youngest honoree. In that category, in July earlier this year, we're thrilled to honour her with a Rising Outstanding Alumni Award, a Rising Star Alumni Award. Tolúlope is currently enrolled in a PhD in computer science at Stanford University, having secured 2 coveted fellowships. Her doctoral research focuses on natural language processing, or NLP, for low resource languages, particularly in sub-Saharan African languages, including her heritage language, Yoruba. Please welcome our guest speaker today, Tolúlope Ògúnremí. Tolúlope.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
So much to go through there in terms of your bio. Very impressive. How does it make you feel when you reflect back on that? I'm always quite conscious of when people talk about myself. How does that make you feel though? It must a great sense of achievement?
Achievement, cringe, a mix of the two. I think the citation is quite long. And so, yeah, it does make me reflect back on how long I've lived now and how much I've done in what is feeling like a longer and longer space of time now, which is great, but also sometimes a bit embarrassing.
No. So let's get into it with the first question. Can you tell me a little bit more about Coders of Colour? Of
course I can. So as you mentioned in the bio, not so brief bio, Coders of Colour is a not-for-profit aimed at getting young underrepresented people of colour into tech through teaching them digital skills for free. We work with 11 to 25-year-olds, 12 to 25-year-olds, basically from year 7 onwards, teaching them digital skills kind of hands-on through project-based learning. So learning how to build an app, learning how to train a machine learning model and use it, in a way that works best for you, learning how to build a website and then building a website for charity. So we have a wide range of project-based learning programs that we run in order to get young people stuck into tech straight away. This not only gives them the autonomy to choose whether or not that's something they want to pursue, having actually had experience, not just experience, but experience in a fun and hopefully engaging way, but also can help people make decisions as to what they would want to do afterwards as well. No strings attached. If you're not too fond of it, that's fine. We're okay with that. I think our main aim is to just get you going. During the pandemic, we also facilitated laptop donation, especially when it became quite clear in 2021 that schools were not going to be open as much as maybe we had anticipated they would be, and realizing that access to a portable technological device is now becoming a blockade to someone's access to education. And so we worked with tech companies to facilitate laptop donation to anyone who needed it, actually, because we thought it was really important. We've also helped people get into careers in tech, either change within the industry and completely change career trajectory, or even just enter into the industry in the first place. So I could obviously go on for the entire hour about everything we've done.
That's fantastic.
But I'd love to talk about how I set it up, because I think in the bio there was mention of me running the first event during my first year at university, and I'm sure the reason many people have or the question many people have is, why exactly have you set this up? Why did you think it was important? I think in 2023 it might be a bit clearer why it was important, but in 2016 maybe not so much. So as a young person, I've always been enamored by technology, enamored by building things with technology, and found the sweet spot at software engineering where I realized things could break and I wouldn't get into trouble for breaking things. And so taught myself to code. I started learning to code when I was 13, just coming home from school when I had time to, having fun during half terms and summer holidays. And then I started to attend tech events, hackathons, as a 16-year-old, which was okay and different. I did feel different. I did feel, not necessarily, I didn't feel like I was in the in-group, let's put it that way. However, I was, a child going to these adult events, so I thought that was more of a reason, until I went to an event for very young people interested in tech and saw that the racial demographic was stark, and out of 1,000 young people there were fewer than 10 people that looked like me. And I think that's when it dawned on me, this could be a systemic issue. This could be thinking of the barriers I faced in just trying to convince my parents to allow me to pursue this career. I can imagine that other young people may face the same barriers or just not have access to information. I vividly remember spending months calling people on the way home from school just to get a work experience opportunity in a tech company, over and over again, for the whole of year 10, basically. And so I know what it's like to not have access to an industry, to not have access to opportunities, or even just family friends who know someone who knows someone. And so I could kind of see, it didn't feel great, but I kind of understood it and felt the deep need to change things up and start something for 13-year-old me, who was teaching herself to code and had no idea what she was doing, and wasted one too many summers just spiraling into a programming language that no one uses anymore. So yeah.
You were 13 and you were aware of that you were underrepresented in an area that you found very interesting. And I don't know quite what that must feel like or what that would have felt like. So would you say that awareness, that initial awareness, and when we talk about, when I bring that into my role at the university, I'm very, very strong that awareness is one of the first barriers to progression, in terms that there's not an awareness or an acceptance or an acknowledgement that actually some groups are underrepresented, and quite often I hear that that's just the way it is. It's just a historical thing, it's a social thing, and you see that and you think actually there are possibly deeper barriers to that access. Can you talk about what you feel what you feel they are in terms of the barriers? What did you, from your conversations and the work with Coders of Colour, what are the kind of things? Are they historical? Are they social? Are they economical? Of why that people of colour are underrepresented in tech?
Sure. Just to clarify, so I was in the comfort of my own home for a few years. I didn't know anything about representation. I was just trying to learn this programming thing. I started going to hackathons when I was 16, but I think, you know, realizing that there may have been barriers was when I was 17 and I went to another event. However, because of the area I lived in when I was 13, there was awareness for different reasons. Reasons that may not be necessarily linked to what we're going to talk about now. So in terms of access to technology and barriers that exist, I mean, there are so many levels as to what the barriers are. There are obviously internal barriers of just feeling like you might not be able to do something. And I think that's a barrier many people have in many situations. If somebody is trying to learn salsa and they don't think they can dance, they might have the internal barrier of like, am I ever going to be able to do this? Which is somewhat human. However, when you then have overt, covert messaging from media or teachers in schools, or other people in your community that that's not something you're meant to be able to do or something you're going to be able to achieve easily, that then becomes an issue. And so it can be barriers just on the school level. We know there are many stories of young people that look like me who have teachers who either deliberately, you know, don't predict high enough grades to allow students to pursue their education in a way that they would like to, or just kind of cause issues for students. And sometimes this can happen for many other reasons as well. So there's the school barrier, there's a community barrier of, you know, our community does this thing, or we are immigrants, so we don't have this connection with society. We don't know someone that knows someone. And so just from our vantage point, we don't think that this is possible. So that's another barrier. And then the other ones are kind of material barriers, or kind of, I would say, socioeconomic barriers. So when I was at school, when I was 13, computer science wasn't compulsory. Very soon after I had finished my secondary education before starting A-levels, it had become compulsory. But knowledge of, you know, coding, programming is probably still relatively new to a lot of teachers. And so certain schools, whether in certain areas or just with the ability to pay certain teachers more, can have different levels of computer science education for young people. And so the areas you live in, the schools you go to, can dictate the quality of your education. If you are enamored by computer science and against all odds are having a great time in a school that's not very well funded, do you have a laptop that you can use? Do you have a laptop that's modern enough for you to use? Do you have the technical know-how to just onboard yourself with installing an IDE, an integrated development environment, or anything else to get yourself going? It seems like the barriers sometimes never stop. I do want to caveat, though, that I think in the last few years, things have changed for a lot of these barriers. So I think, especially community-wise, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the case anymore. I think most people know about tech, and most people have been presented an image of tech being a very lovely, lucrative profession that is relatively easy to get into. And so it's something that people, I would say, culturally are more aware of in spaces that I'm in now. And it's more just getting there, but also having more accurate information as to what is required to either earn a certain amount of money or get a certain type of job that may still pose as a barrier to people getting into tech.
Was there a lot of diversity? Like, what do you in Possible Solutions? Was there a lot of diversity in in people that taught you, or was there diversity of thought in terms of people thinking outside the box and encouragement? Was there a lot of encouragement, whether through education or through family or friends? Because sometimes I can imagine, with background in fashion myself, I remember saying to my mum, I kind of wanted to work in fashion. She kind of looked at me and, in disbelief. Were you encouraged within tech? Because I think sometimes that can really enamor people as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say no, unfortunately. I'm just very hard-headed, and don't let things go. I wouldn't necessarily say I was encouraged for a long while. In terms of diversity in who I was taught by, I'm currently learning Kiswahili, the language at Stanford, and this is the first Black teacher I've had since I was in primary school. So like, in terms of diversity in who I was taught by, that's not the case, and that's still not really the case now. And I'm putting myself through school still, a few years too many, and I'm still not seeing diversity around me. I'm probably seeing much less now than I feel like I should be. In terms of being encouraged, though, I do have to credit the wonderful Black women and men at times that I've met on my journey and from starting Coders of Color. So actually, whilst I was at Southampton, I was doing maths and CS, and there were a few Black women in the maths side. On the CS side, there were no Black women aside from me, and the cohort was 200 odd people. So I think that's enough information on diversity, and also me seeking out community and having to go outside of the university community to seek it out. But once I established my interest in getting people that look like me into the sector, then a bunch of different people that I met were wonderful and encouraged me to keep going and pursue what I was doing. And I think there was this kind of blind encouragement of like, I have no idea what you're doing, but I support it. So just keep going. I'm not sure what else to do.
It takes that resilience. I think that if you are in an industry that is not traditionally, you traditionally don't see yourself, it takes a lot of resilience. And within my role and at the university, you see this resilience. And it's not just around colour as well, it's about gender and certain subjects as well. People with different protected characteristics, you feel, well, actually that resilience, that extra burden to not only study a subject, but also to carry the weight of being the first. And then sometimes, and even in your bio, it's you're kind of the youngest, or you're the first, or you're the first Black this, or you're first Black that. So you become a token for lots of people that will follow you, which sometimes that's very good, but that's an extra layer that I think sometimes you have to carry. So I want to just talk a little bit about your research as well at Stanford. How is that, your PhD? Can you tell me a little bit more about that, and also about that cultural difference of studying in America as well? How's that different?
Oh, yeah, okay. So in terms of the PhD, I'm sure there's a question mark. Maybe it's worth filling in how I actually got from Southampton in 2019 to Stanford, where I am now. I mentioned this in my address to the graduates when I received the Rising Star Award, which I'm very grateful to the university for. Okay. So I had to take a year out between my undergrad and my master's, and then I took a master's. I had a master's studied a master's at the University of Edinburgh, applied to Stanford and was admitted there. So towards the end of my undergraduate degree, I realized that, I found out about this thing called natural language processing, and realized that I was really interested in it because I'm really interested in languages, but also that I had a really unique perspective as someone who is a child of immigrants, is of Nigerian heritage, is of Yoruba ethnicity, and can bring some special insight into at least that language to the field. And so, I kind of looked around at the university and said, oh, is anyone doing natural language processing here? And the answer was kind of, no, that's not the case. And so I said, right, that's fine. Realized I should probably do a master's, took a year out between doing the master's, and then applied to Stanford, got to Stanford. So in terms of what I do natural language processing for African languages. I work on sub-Saharan African languages, both multilingually and monolingually. And I also do speech processing because I learned speech processing at the University of Edinburgh as well. So in terms of what natural language processing is, I'm going to steal one of my supervisor's definitions, very one-liner definition, which is using computational methods to analyze language. But I personally think it's best described or conveyed through the different tasks or tools that you can have, whether that's machine translation, so using things like Google Translate, summarization. If you have a report of like a football game, can you have a condensed kind of 2-paragraph summary of what happened in the game? There's speech recognition for speech processing. So everything that I'm saying to you now, if there are live transcriptions, that's a task. There's speech synthesis, which is if I were too tired to attend this event or wasn't really in the mood to chat to you tonight, can I synthesize my voice and make it sound like it's actually me talking to you today? And so, yeah, there are many kind of natural language processing tasks like that. And in order to train these machine learning models, you need data. And for languages like English and other high resource languages, there are tons of sources of data, let alone the amount of data. An important NLP application that I think most people are familiar with that I forgot about is a natural language generation with things like ChatGPT. So you can imagine with how powerful that model is and how well it works as we're interacting with it. You probably need a lot of data and a lot of knowledge of the English language in order to do that. And there are over 7,000 languages spoken in the world, and a very, very small percentage of those have enough data to produce models that work anywhere near as well as that. And so I think a lot of my research is just about ensuring that languages from our cultures, I guess, as Black people, because Creoles also count for people who are celebrated in Black History Month, are represented in this technology. But also, I think it's a good scientific opportunity to ask the question, do we really need that much data to get the models to work well? Are there methods that we can employ that leverage less data in order to have similar results? I think there was a question about the difference in life in the US as well compared to the UK.
That's such a good, that's such a good answer. I'm sat here thinking, my goodness, natural language processing. It's just a default. English is such a default in where everything that we see, especially in technology, in AI, ChatGPT-4, and in the future, the default is language. So where we see that bias, and at the university, especially through my role, I see language as actually one of the biggest barriers to inclusion, to diversity, to a sense of culture. Not only because of the spoken verbal language, but there's an absence and there's a presence. I'm very aware. I was actually very aware when I started this, actually in the terms of pronunciation of your name, and I know we talked about this as well. And I was born in the UK to West African parents, but I know that the default is English. I kind of think in English as well, and I removed from my West Africanness. And I try and do more work to actually think there's so much more in terms of language. I can go abroad and I just can get away with not speaking Spanish or Italian anywhere because of that default bias. And I think what you're really kind of excavating here is how that dominant language can lead to, we always think of language being quite liberating, but sometimes very, very limiting in terms of how we think. And I think the language of a university, the language of ED&I, for the want of a better word, another acronym, is that the greater specificity that we can have, especially through natural language processing, we can then understand other cultures and other barriers so much more. And I think your definition and the way that you describe that's incredible, which brings me to the second point of my question around those cultural differences in America, because living in America must be very different to living in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, before, just to address what you mentioned, that's one of the things I'm most passionate about. English being default, French being default, Spanish being default, Dutch being default is deliberate, right?
Because
It was a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Residual, I would question that. I think it's still deliberate. I think it's still active. I think even trying to migrate somewhere and etc. You know, there are many barriers, and stripping people of their language is a deliberate act. And so yeah, it's not on purpose. I'll just say that. And so I think it's really important, especially, you know, Black History Month is a great time to think about it, whether or not Britain will like to address colonialism. People who are affected by that today will choose to kind of remember that.
And that's what I mean by residual from the transatlantic slave trade. When the enslaved were freed, the language is still here. I'm still oppressed by the language. My mum was born in West Africa. She speaks English. She no longer speaks a Creole unless she's speaking to aunties and uncles. But she is forced to then speak this language, but also through not your world, our world, the digital world, the tech world, we are forced to speak a language. And it's so interesting where we just are then sometimes not aware of that we will have to, for ChatGTP, for the sake of an argument, we are forced to then speak that in a language which is not our first language, which is so interesting. So what does that mean on a global scale for everybody? They're forced to speak that. So interesting.
Yeah. So again, I think it's a privilege to not be aware that technology doesn't work in certain people's languages, especially when those people have no reason to communicate in another language, however, cannot access technology because of that. But to actually get to answering your question about differences in the US versus the UK. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is, you know, colonialism is also a thing. Like the transatlantic slave trade is one thing, colonialism is another. I would say me kind of being here is more due to colonialism than it is a slave trade. But yeah, so speaking of that, I guess those differences, life in the US is different. I don't think I'll say too much about it right now. But one thing I will say is the word Black has now has a contextual meaning for me. And I think I'm not necessarily considered Black when I'm in the US, because I think Black has a specific connotation to people who come from a specific history, which on one hand I understand. On the other, you know, I then feel pushed out and othered. And I think Blackness in the UK and Black History Month, for example, is really celebrating everyone from different walks of life, children of immigrants growing up in the UK, like myself, you know, people who moved over in their lifetimes, people who were forced to move over hundreds of years ago and you know, grew up in places like the Caribbean, for example. And I think that's less of a thing. I think the Pan-African nature of Blackness, I think is much less of a thing in the US. And there seems to be a bit more kind of division in that way. I think, you know, to be a bit crude, like the Black body and you know, where I live and how I move around, I think I'm more conspicuous of. I struggle to differentiate whether it's because things can escalate so quickly due to people being able to bear arms here, or whether it is just because I'm cast as something for no particular reason in the US. And again, I live in the Bay Area, Northern California, which is a very specific subculture. There are many majority Black areas. There are many areas with a thriving, you know, Black upper class even in the US. But where I live, I think it's a bit different. Things may be a bit heightened when I'm over here.
That's so interesting. And even touching on where we share quite similarly the same language with America from the United Kingdom, there are pronounced differences as well. And I wondered if you feel that there is a travel America extensively, and I've always felt when in America, like you've touched on, your blackness is very different, and how class plays a part as well in terms of your blackness, and how you being a woman plays a part. Is there a different intersection there as well? So I have the privilege, I can talk about my blackness, but I have the privilege of also being a male. And that sometimes not forget, but I'm aware that actually being a man in America and being a black woman in America are two entirely different things. Have you experienced anything in terms of that? Do you see barriers in terms of your work, or just being in America?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak too much for Blackness in the US. I've only lived here a couple of years, and it's Black History Month in the UK now. So I might just, make this a bit broader, because I don't want this focus on the US to detract from the fact that there are atrocities committed in the UK very often. And, it's not that different, Blackness in the UK versus the US in the context of how society treats a Black person. So yeah, as a woman, I have to say, this is going to go back to the tech thing, unfortunately, possibly because that's all I do with my life. But it's very clear when I'm treated, when it's just because I'm a woman. I've had situations, for example, attending hackathons, and there's the classic, a woman gives an idea, everyone ignores it. A man gives the same idea, everyone thinks it's a wonderful idea, situations. But, being Black as well, I think makes me inherently standoffish, and makes people not necessarily interested in connecting with me, or trying to help me, or seeing me as someone who is, deserving of help. I have had situations across institutions where, I'm really friendly with a white man and we're both going through the exact same experience, and it's completely different outcomes, or the support is completely different. I think I would have to attribute 90% of my trials and tribulations to my Blackness, and maybe 10% to being a woman, to be honest. I think because the Blackness is so apparent, and maybe has deeper connotations than my gender in the spaces that I am in. But yeah, it's not been great being at the intersection of the two.
And that's really difficult to hear. And I think that brings me on to my I was going to say next line of questioning. You're not on trial. I wanted to ask you about what then Black History Month means to you. And I know that we've had conversations, and it's October, so the UK has Black History Month in October. In America, I believe it's in January, to coincide with
February. It's in
February. Is that to coincide with Martin Luther King Day? I'm not sure.
There is a specific history that I learned about last year that I am not going to butcher in this conversation. But it's linked to something.
Yeah. So what does it mean for you in the UK? Let's concentrate on the UK Black History Month. What does Black History Month, because I have very particular, that many people have heard me talk before, I have very particular issues around Black History Month, but I'd love to listen to you and take your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I may have an opposing view. It might just be because I look across the Atlantic to the UK with rose-tinted glasses, and miss Black culture and miss, being respected to some extent over there in the UK. But first of all, I am Nigerian, so Nigerian Independence Day is the 1st of October, so it's always a celebration, but always a stark reminder that there are many people on earth right now that are older than the country of Nigeria. It turned 63 earlier this month. So that's a great way to start. Wonderful cultural celebration kind of within the in-group. I think it's a great opportunity for people. I remember at school learning about like Benjamin Zephaniah, going to certain art exhibits, like seeing No Woman, No Cry and things like that during Black History Month, and kind of being forced to learn about a historical figure at that time. Is it enough? I wouldn't necessarily say so. Is it something I would have experienced otherwise? I'm not sure. As someone who's now, running an organization, getting young people into tech, young Black people into tech, it is the spotlight month where people remember you exist and people want to amplify your work. And I think if you're doing good work all the time, then amplification is great, actually. But in terms of kind of general consensus to Black History Month, and maybe from people that are not Black, I think there are some things that people need to still acknowledge that people are refusing to do so, but that's kind of a year-round thing. So that would be my immediate thoughts on what Black History Month means to me.
That's really interesting. For me, sometimes I feel that it's either when we look at Blackness, it's either a celebration or a commiseration, and I think there's those two extremes. We're either celebrating something, the first this Black History Month, and it goes across other months as well, LGBT, etc., International Women's Day. We're celebrating that, or commiserating something, or some atrocity or something, and the work happens in the middle. For me, the work happens throughout the whole year, and for me, it's quite tiring and weathering to then keep on celebrating, keep on commiserating, and it just becomes an endless cycle. And I'm not sure, and I'd love to get a place where we don't need to celebrate because it's already embedded and integrated. And I think that's the goal. And I think that's the goal, possibly through education, and definitely at the university in terms of the strategy, is to embed certain things so they become normalized through the creation. So we're not looking at kind of interventions and preventions, we're looking at greater creations from the onset, through the curriculum, for example, through the culture, through recruitment, etc. So we're not celebrating, and your achievements are fantastic, but we need that to be normalized through, there is greater representation, more people, more Black women are working in tech, just like yourself, so you're leading that through. So kind of before we go to questions as well, I wanted to ask you then, what can universities do to embed all the topics that we've talked about, all that greater, and I'm not even going to use the word diversity, increase the representation of Black women in particular, because Black History Month is looking at Black women in the UK. So what do we specifically need to do? And what difference would it make, do you think, for particularly your industry, but essentially for our university as well? What do you think that we need to do?
Wow, what a tall order for me to
you could answer
this question as the D&I consultant. I had my fair share of experiences at universities, because I've been at different institutions. I think there's a lot to be done. The most important, at least for Black women specifically, since the university is highlighting Black women, and I'm a Black woman. There is the slogan that was popularized in 2020 about protecting Black women, and I think that's important. And it doesn't necessarily mean physical, but if a woman is having a situation, listening, learning, supporting. I almost made complaints during my undergrad and didn't feel comfortable to go the full way because it would be on a record and I didn't know how I would be perceived and etc. and things like that. So I have to say I had a wonderful personal tutor during my undergrad who completely embodied like the right way to handle the situations and was extremely, extremely supportive, which I'm really grateful for. But I think just listening, learning, and I also feel in general with the whole kind of equity, diversity, inclusion, however we want to call it now, there's this assumption that once someone's in the door, the work is done, the work is finished. And actually, especially for people on the other side, the work has just started, because you're not going to know the cultural kind of challenges you have to face. Some people are not comfortable drinking for religious reasons, and that's going to require an overhaul in culture and how people socialize. You know, some people just culturally are just not, you know, enmeshed with doing certain things in a certain way. Some people going to be perceived as aggressive, always, irrespective of how young they look or are perceived by people within their group. So I think listening, learning, and just being respectful is what I can say quickly in how to handle things.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your answers so far. And to the audience, please do post your questions. You'll find the questions on the right-hand side of your screen. Please continue to add your questions, and then I'm going to start with some of the questions. And I haven't really seen these yet, so they're going to come thick and fast. And I know this is the bit where we're just open. So the first question that we have here is, how can people support Black History Month and other similar initiatives in ways that are meaningful and not just performative?
Thank you very much for your question. I mean, yeah, it's a great question. It's a great start. Trying to not be performative. I think there's a lot of self-righteousness and performative activism, especially where I live right now. And so already identifying that is a great step. One thing I think we mentioned earlier on is that most of the work is actually done during the year. And I personally do think we still need a month to just celebrate our achievements, because it's a great avenue for education, and just expanding your horizons as anyone, even Black people too. But a lot of the time the work is not done in October and does not start or finish in October. And so a good way to help, one, would be to think about it at another time, or just, you know, track initiatives or anything else that you want to help. Like, most people who are really on the ground and really helping are helping every month of the year. They're not just helping in October. Being, you know, approaching whether it's organizations or people with the sentiment of, I'm just trying to do my best, and importantly, taking correction, or, you know, internalizing what somebody's telling you in order to not be performative, is probably the best thing that I can advise.
Brilliant. And I think with all the staff networks that we have at the University of Southampton, being involved in the networks, whether you're a student or staff, they're still there. But there are so many things that happen throughout the year that do tremendous work in empowering, engaging, supporting, which I guess is culminated in Black History Month as well. Thank you for that. Next question. What was the piece of technical phenomenon that first got you interested in computer science?
Thanks for that question. It was just a mobile phone, which I don't know if it's sad or anything, but I just remember as a very young child, like, looking at the settings a bit of the phone and seeing how when you change the options, the background color on each thing changed, and I was like, whoa, this is so cool. Like, I want to be able to know how to do this stuff, you know. So it was just a mobile phone. I didn't have the opportunity to, you know, use a bunch of technology before I was a teenager and went on immersion trips and things like that. So yeah, just the phone.
That's really interesting. I asked my students today, we were looking at product, and I said, you know, what are the core functions of a phone? And they all looked at me and said, like Wi-Fi and touchscreen. And I said, well, actually, the core functions of a phone in the 1990s was just to make a call. And nowadays we have this kind of augmented, we want everything on there. But when you first look at a phone, it was just to make a call and perhaps that was it. So it's really interesting. Those things can really kind of invigorate kind of your enthusiasm for tech. Next question, do you have any advice for anyone looking to follow in your footsteps, perhaps particularly Black women? How would someone follow in your footsteps? What path do they need to take?
Wow. So I have possibly controversial advice. I don't think I wouldn't advise to follow in someone's footsteps. I think if you mean abstracting to pursuing technology or starting a social enterprise for something you're really interested in, then I can give like very general advice. But I think a lot of people see role models and want to do exactly what that role model did. And it becomes hard and frustrating and not very fulfilling because it's not natural to yourself. So I guess the first thing would be, do what makes you happy and what makes you comfortable. If you're really passionate about something, definitely test something out and go for it. As mentioned, I've the vast majority of my journey has been alone and has been, behind closed doors, spending years just getting up to scratch with programming with nobody in my vicinity to kind of help me out. And so I would say my biggest takeaway that can be generally applicable is to kind of keep going. Did I learn that from doing a bunch of maths and knowing that if you practice enough times, you'll finally understand, the technique and the way to answer a question? Possibly. But yeah, just resilience, passion. But I think you have to really be aligned with what you're interested in to be able to sustain yourself for that long. So it's always fine to check your values. And I spoke about being grounded by uncertainty in my address to the graduates in July. But yeah, always making sure you recalibrate. The pandemic may have changed how you think about things. Black History Month may have changed how you think about things. What I'm saying right now may have changed how you think about things. And that's completely fine. Just make sure you always feel grounded and you always feel motivated by something that's very solid, and keep going, never give up.
Gosh, yeah. And sometimes that's very difficult, that's very difficult. So hearing that is very inspirational. Which just comes to my next question, actually. So I didn't even see this. So this is such an inspirational talk. How do you stay motivated and push through those barriers? Like you said, how do you keep going? Because I think working in the EDI space is very interesting. I look at the acronym and you're working with equality, you're working with diversity, you're working with inclusion, but quite often you're working with inequality, a lack of diversity and a lack of inclusion. It can be so difficult just to keep going. How do you keep going in the spaces which you've already kind of outlined? How do you motivate yourself, I guess, to kind of occupy this space? And I think there's something about your personality as well that comes through from when you're speaking. So what does that come from? Is that family? Is that culture? Is that your heritage? Like, how do you still maintain that energy?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for saying this is inspiring. I feel like my work here is done and I'm happy to leave now, but I will answer the question because I really appreciate that comment. So I'm going to be super annoying and say, I'm Christian. And so my biggest motivator is my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. But is God, and, being a person of faith. That's really helpful. And I think even people who aren't of faith can still appreciate the benefits of having faith and how grounding that can be for a person. So in terms of continuing to keep going, there were many a times, especially my master's, where I was literally just praying that I would get through and had nothing, no faith in my academics whatsoever, and 100% faith in the Lord. So there's that, which I think is important. There is also my culture and my heritage and being a child of immigrants and knowing I always have to just keep going and keep working hard, having the knowledge that my parents have sacrificed a bunch. I mean, I have a completely new understanding of being an immigrant now that I am an immigrant. And I'm an immigrant in, the 2020s, where I'm talking to the UK with my computer. I can talk to people with my phone. It doesn't cost an arm and a leg to reach out to people who I love and appreciate and miss very much. And so knowing that so much was sacrificed for me to be here, of course that's going to keep keep me going, that look, you can't do this, you can't disappoint these people, and not necessarily in a negative way, but out of appreciation. What can I do to show my appreciation for the sacrifices that were made for me? I can keep going. One thing, oh sorry.
No, gosh, I was just that is something I feel all the time. The sacrifices, the generational sacrifices that have been made just to be here is something that's never lost on me. Just to be able to sit on this platform, have this conversation, both of us having this conversation, is not lost on me. That maybe even 5 years ago, I wouldn't have thought this possible. Maybe 10 years ago, because there's always these constant barriers. I think you've probably had this conversation as well with your parents who have been told you have to work harder than your peers. You're going to have these barriers. And I always say, gosh, I remember having that conversation at a very young age and thinking, what are these barriers and why do I particularly have them as well? I remember my dad saying to me, you're going to have to work harder than a lot of other people. Your friends will leave you and outgrow you or whatever, and you're still going to have to be there. And I think what he was saying is your blackness, you have to kind of empower that, acknowledge that and use it for that good. So when you were speaking there, I thought actually that sacrifice that my parents that came over, my grandparents and further on, is never really lost. It's never far away from me. So it was really interesting listening to you speak on that as well. So I know we've got a few more minutes, and there's a couple. I'm going to try and get through as many questions as we want, me the host. If you could, what developments do you hope to see in the AI space?
Oh,
realistic or otherwise, it says in brackets.
Realistic or otherwise. AI-induced equity, I would say, in the theme of of this conversation. But to be serious, I'm not really sure. To be honest, I'm kind of scared. I feel like AI, quote unquote AI, right? I do natural language processing. And I'm not sure if the intelligence has really entered the chat yet, but I feel like people use it for such nefarious things that I'm starting to feel apprehensive about, like, oh, I could think of something that does something super positive, and immediately, someone's using it for something very negative. But in line with kind of my research goals in general, I would love to see it work for as many people across the globe as possible, in a way that speaks to their language, culture, and way of living, in a way that it can improve our lives or society kind of equally for everyone across the world, which is so pie in the sky, but yeah.
No, you never know. It might be that reality. I think I've got time for one more question. And if I haven't asked your questions, please do note that we will try and get back to you with answers, Tolúlope, if that's okay with you. So the final question, was there a particular moment when it was clear that all the work you were doing with Coders of Colour had real impact?
Particular moment is tough. There were many, but for the sake of time, I'll give one that that affected me personally quite a lot, which was, I had a friend who was working in a kind of university program to get people, help people just get into university and apply. And, this was not related to me in any way. And she said, oh, I was interviewing a kid for this program, and they said they want to study computer science because they went to a Coders of Colour event and learned about computer science that way. And I was like, oh my God, don't know who this girl is. But clearly, whatever she attended impacted her quite a lot. So
that's
very
fantastic.
Touched by that.
Final question. Final question this time. If there's one thing you could have done differently, what would it be?
Oh no, there's not enough time for this. I have to think about this a little bit. One thing I would have done differently. I I'm gonna cop out and say I think everything worked out the way it should have, and I don't have any regret about anything right now.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's a positive way. Tolúlope, I just want to thank you deeply. So engaging, so insightful, so powerful. It brings us to the end of this conversation. Just to remind you all on the call that there's a short poll. Please complete that if you can. If you have 2 minutes to spare, it would really help us with these events. I want to thank all of those involved, the technical setup, Rebecca, Susanna, Adi, and all the team. I know I'm forgetting people as well, but especially to you, Tolúlope, for just giving a real, I think it's so important to have different insights, different conversations. If I would say one thing for people that are on this call and some of the questions around what can we do, is to continue having these conversations. Some of them are really important for us, and it doesn't take Black History Month, it doesn't take anything. It's you know, I'm having in conversation pieces. The university is committed to having these conversations and understanding and ensuring people feel seen, safe, supported in these conversations. I think it starts with events like this. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us tonight. And it's kind of like the end of Black History Month, nearly, but it doesn't take Black History Month to have these conversations. So please do continue having these. I want to say thank you from everybody, but especially from you, Tolúlope. So thank you. I will say good night, and I think that has been brilliant. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. If we're still on, thank you to the wonderful alumni team. Thank you, Tasha. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Josie. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect.